Los Angeles, good morning.
Good morning. Brian, thank you for your network, actually. Mr. Wolf, back in December, Carl Cameron from Fox News ran a 4-part series that detailed really a massive spying operation by Israel that was tapping all the phones in the United States and tapping all the secure lines of the FBI, the CIA, and the White House.
All the phones in the United States?
Yeah, through companies that
imagine that transcription effort.
Well, of course it's done with keywords and all that in software, but the other thing was that all the secure lines to the White House and basically the entire federal government. They also said, and this was corroborated in a report released by the DEA, that there was a team of art students that were expelled. Actually, it was the largest spy-related expulsion in American history, that had teams of intelligence guys, Israeli intelligence guys, on the same block.
And this was a Fox report?
A Fox report by Carl Cameron. It was then. And they were the only ones that picked it up, although...
Is that good or bad? Did you believe the report?
Yeah, there definitely was a true report. The local newspaper reports had it and others, but no one on the air carried it, except Fox News. And then, to make matters worse, Fox News, even on their web, you can go into the December archives and look at the report. Actually, you can look at where the report was, Israeli spying or whatever, and they actually pulled it from the archives and nobody followed up.
This is a conspiracy of silence, are you saying?
Well, if you go back through the archives, Mr. Wolf, you'll see that it's the only report pulled. The archives go back through, like last year.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for the call.
Next call for Bill GERTZ comes from Newark, Delaware, on our independent line. Good morning.
Good morning. Let's see, I was interested in the story Carl Cameron broke, 120 Israeli spies that were arrested in the United States shortly after the September incident, and some of these people had been shadowing the terrorists that blew up the buildings, living in the vicinity and keeping up with them. On May 17th, 2 Israelis were arrested in Washington State in a van that had traces of high explosives. I think it was 5 Israeli military spies, as they, the way they described, were in a building in Brooklyn watching the September bombing, and all of this has been kept out of the press. And I just wonder. I mean, this is good reading. This is what we want to know about. If Israel supposedly knew, and there's stories that their intelligence agency told our government, why isn't that the story? When did we know? What did they know? When did they let us know?
Are you familiar with this story?
Yes, good questions. As for the 120 Israeli spies, that's a story that's out there. I've looked at that a little bit. I really haven't found really what's behind that story. What is going on there is that there have been a number of Israelis, and I've actually seen some people come to my house in Maryland who are selling art, and they identify themselves as students, and there's something unusual about it. I have a feeling that this may be some collection aspect to it, but I don't see any kind of major effort to figure out. I know that the U.S. government has expelled some of these people. You mentioned the May 17th incident on the West Coast. I looked into this very carefully, and this was a story that 2 Israeli nationals were stopped in a rental van near a military, I think it was a naval base in Washington State. And the initial reports were that they had somehow detected some explosives on the steering wheel, and obviously that's a huge story. Well, I looked into it, and the word I got from federal officials was that it was a false indicator, that there weren't really explosive traces there. Now, I don't know what to make of it. I'm not out there. If I were out there, perhaps I could get a little bit closer to the story, but the initial blush on that was that there wasn't anything to it.
Could you go back? You mentioned students selling art. What was the connection again to the
Well, that somehow these Israeli art students have been spotted around a number of places, including some federal buildings, and that has raised some counterintelligence concerns within the U.S. government that perhaps the Israelis have been conducting some type of intelligence collection activities. I haven't really been able to get all the facts of that story, but I think he was referring to Carl Cameron's story on Fox News, and he's done some good reporting on it.
But one thing I really want to ask you, and I hope you bring it up when Carl Cameron comes on, is that there's a big controversy over a report he did for Fox on 9/11, and where he implicated or he suggested that it was in a four-part series that there were a bunch of Israeli art students that were involved in espionage and may have been following Al-Qaeda, and there was concern that they didn't report this incident to the American authorities, and they were eventually left on visa violations. They were arrested, about 140 of them. Carl Cameron reported this, and it was a big brouhaha, and it was on Fox's website, and it was taken off of Fox's website, and it's been a big story in Le Monde. It's been a big story in Le Humanité, and it's been reported in Salon.com, and everywhere you turn and you see the story, the whole thing is always reported about Carl Cameron and his story, and with these oblique quotes about Carl Cameron being puzzled by the strong reaction and everything. So please ask it. I bet you you'll probably have more guests ask Carl Cameron the same thing.
We've had a number of calls on that as well, and he'll be here in about 35 minutes. We'll bring it up with him. Next call, Silver Spring, Maryland, Republican line for Carl Cameron.
Yes. Good morning. I'm calling to congratulate Mr. Cameron on his reporting. He broke one of the most important stories this year with the Israeli spy ring. Problem was that Fox News pulled off the networks almost as soon as he reported it. And I'd just like to ask Mr. Cameron how he felt about that, and how he feels in general when news with potentially damaging, incriminating information against Israel is pulled off almost as soon as it's aired.
Thank you. And we should point out, Carl Cameron, that one of the first calls about an hour and 20 minutes ago dealt with this very issue. First of all, what is the caller talking about, and what happened?
In December of last year, Fox did a four-part series. I reported a four-part series that described several scenarios, several dynamics within the continental United States. There's a report that was circulated, it has now been disclosed by the DEA, that reported that over the course of a year and a half, numerous federal agencies had encountered individuals who refer to themselves as Israeli art students, essentially visiting these facilities, military installations, FBI, DEA, INS, both the publicly listed addresses as well as some that are not made public, and those particular facilities are intended to be kept secret. And they began to ask questions and attempt to sell their art. And we reported that this was a dynamic that had been described by government documents as an intelligence gathering operation. Following that particular story, we then described the U.S. intelligence community's grave concerns that our civilian telecommunications are compromised and vulnerable to intelligence gathering, because many of the companies that provide services in our telephone calling are owned by or closely aligned with Israel, and that they have been occasionally investigated by our federal government for tapping or taking information from our telecommunications for the purposes of intelligence. And finally, that there is a concern in our government that the way in which we actually conduct wiretapping under law enforcement granted judge-approved surveillance subpoenas is also potentially vulnerable to compromise and intercept. Excuse me, again, because some of the companies involved with the manufacturing of that equipment are Israeli, and that they've never been tested for vulnerabilities, and that too has been investigated as a potential threat. Potential and investigation are the important things to remember. There is no claim by anybody in our government that the government of Israel or anybody in Israel is actually spying. That these are mysteries, that there is evidence to suggest a problem, and they've yet to been able to solve it.
Did anyone tell you to kill the story?
No. As a matter of fact, what happened was we did put the transcripts of my story on the internet, and after a period of several days it was taken down off the internet as what I've been told was merely to make available for a huge deluge of war-related material. You got to remember this was December, so we were still very much in the throes of the September 11th aftermath, and there was war underway in Afghanistan, and they had to make way for other news, and we've done some follow-up reporting on it, and there has since our story, which was denounced by the pro-Israel lobby in this country as anti-Semitic and biased and inaccurate. Much of what we've reported has now been reported all over the world because the documents that I used and was careful to protect, because some of it was considered classified and secret at the time, have now appeared virtually all over the world, corroborating our story and what we reported.
Well, I agree that talks should continue. Creation of a Palestinian state after the violence has stopped is a laudable goal. I certainly hope that the Cheney visit is a productive visit. I think the moderate Arab states have to be working closely with us to find both a way to stop the violence and an end game that makes sense for everyone in the region, which includes the survival and security and respect for the state of Israel, which I think is absolutely essential to an essential goal of U.S. foreign policy, and one I strongly support.
And Robert Simpson emails, could you ask Representative Harman about the deportation of Israeli art students spying in the U.S., and should this worry us? Are you familiar with this issue?
Of Israeli arts, I'm certainly familiar with the fact that we have been rounding up people on student visas and considering whether they might have had anything to do with terrorism, and some of those rounded up are Israelis, but I don't know the specific facts. I would not like to comment except to say that I am not in favor of unlimited detention. I voted for the Patriot Act, which passed the Congress, which put limits on detention, and I think there ought to be court review after 7 days or an appropriate period of time about why it is that we're holding people, and roundups are not things that I think this country stands for.